Hey, hun, could you get the door? I think the beat's here.
Hello there. Welcome to Grandma's favorite podcast. Look, before it was called my grandmother's favorite podcast, and then I decided that that's too many words. It's too many syllables. It's too many syllables. It's too many syllables by two. So I've shortened it to Grandma's favorite podcast. And who knows? Next time it might be changed to Grandma's podcast, or maybe even just Grandma, or maybe I'll even pull a Prince move and just change the name of the podcast to a symbol. I don't know. The point is that I am the Captain Naomi of this Osiris, and I'm going to take us through whatever underground electrical shaft I choose. Okay? And also, we have video now. This is the first podcast with video. Before we only had audio, now we have video. So I guess I'm going to put this up on YouTube. Yes? So if you're only consuming the audio part, then you're missing out. Let me tell you, on getting to see me sit down in front of a wall where I have this lovely view of Hollywood. It's so much nicer now. It turns out that things are much more beautiful when the entire sky isn't being choked to death by wildfire smoke. Yeah, when the entire West Coast isn't on fire, it's much better. I have family in Oregon, and I'm here in Southern California, and it was a nightmare. It's better now, but 2020 just loves to crank out the hits. It's what it does. It's like a demented Ed Sheeran sitting in his beat lab, cranking out the hits, and we have no choice but to listen to that shitty record. And you can either assume the fetal position and cry, or you can dance. And as for me, I'm doing both. I'm in the fetal position and I am crying, but I'm also flossing. And I know how to floss. And the reason I know how to floss is because I was actually doing a completely separate dance move from the video. Do you remember that old viral video called What in the Butt? I say what in the butt. I said what in the butt. You want to do it in my butt? In my butt? Let's do it in the butt. Okay. If you've never seen that or heard of that video, then that entire string of song is probably a little bit confusing at best. The point is that there was a dance move from that video where he's kind of doing this flowy, I believe his name was Samwell, and he was doing this flowy arm dance thing, and I found it to be mesmerizing, so I learned that. Fast forward, I was doing that move, listening to a song, and it suddenly, I don't know if it was because of the vibe of the song or the tempo or whatever it was, but it transformed my move into the floss, and suddenly I could floss. So that's what I'm doing. I am fetal flossing my way through 2020. Isn't that nice? And I'm also podcasting my way through 2020. And I'm podcasting for one reason, and one reason only. I'm trying to get that Joe Rogan money. Okay? Because apparently Spotify is out there just handing out $100 million checks to successful podcasters like Joe Rogan. And I want to get me one of them checks. Because Daddy needs a fancy cat. And that's what I've decided. When I come into a large sum of money, my first move is going to be to get a fancy cat. And I want to get a sphynx. And I want to get a sphynx. I want to get a fancy sphynx for 3 reasons. Reason number 1, they're expensive. And I want to flex a little bit. And to me, that's kind of it's a powerful way to flex while also remaining kind of subtle. Number 2, companionship. Number 3, they don't have any hair. Because I don't have time for cat hair floating around in my apartment and flying into my mouth. Because then I'm going to be spending all day going like this. I don't have time for that. Nobody has time for that. It's ridiculous. So, and because, so the Sphinx is not native to Egypt, contrary to popular belief. The Sphinx is native to Toronto, Canada. And because of this, I shall call her Drake. So let's recap. Let's catch everybody up here. Get a bunch of money. Get a Sphinx. Name her Drake. And because I'm going to be absolutely swimming in the money, come and find me, Nemo, that's a Drake lyric, this is how I'm going to negotiate the price of the cat. This is how a $100 million TJW negotiates the price of a Sphinx. I'm going to arrive at the Sphinx farm and approach the Sphinx farmer, who will have baby Drake in his arm, and he's going to say $3,500 and she's all yours. And I'm going to say $3,000. And then he's going to say $3,250. And then I'm going to say $1.5 million cash, or I walk. And he rolls his eyes and he laughs and he thinks that I'm just there to waste his time until I present the duffel bag. And I lay it at his feet and I unzip it, and he sees the incredibly large sum of cash in the bag. And he's frozen. He can't believe what he's looking at. Mouth agape. Just mouth breathing. And so I gingerly pluck baby Drake out of his arm and place her into my arm. And I say, you go get yourself a nice, aged, single malt Highland Scotch. And maybe even a beautiful woman with a heart of gold and a rack that could feed an entire village, and go celebrate. And with that, I turn around and Drake and I head out into the street, where I call an Uber Black. Okay? Because I have $100 million minus the cost of Drake. I have $98.5 million, and I'm not driving anymore. I am to be driven for the rest of my natural life. Because this is the mistake that people make, right? They acquire a large sum of cash, and then they go out and they buy a zippy car, and then they develop a cocaine habit, and then they do a bunch of cocaine, and then they get into their zippy car, and they go flying through some curves and slam into a guardrail going 200 miles an hour and explode to death. And as romantic as that all sounds, that's not how I'm That's not how my story's going to end. Drake and I have different plans that don't involve exploding to death. So I call the driver. The driver shows up. And I say, would you mind if Drake sat in the front? Because that's what she likes. And because I need to sit in the back and do some business on my iPad. Because I have $98.5 million that I got to start moving around. I got to start investing in stocks, and then I got to trade those stocks, and then I got to buy some hockey teams. And so I'm like, I'm going to sit in the back. Drake's going to sit in the front. Is that cool? And he says, sure. And if you didn't catch what that is, that's a Scottish accent. Because in my fantasy, the driver is Scottish. And he is jacked. Like, jacked. But like utility muscle jacked. Not like bodybuilder, bowling ball, bicep jacked. He's well-rounded. And he looks like a mixture of Javier Bardem and Jason Momoa. So he's this beautiful, half Spanish, half whatever the fuck Jason Momoa is, and he's Scottish. And so I'm like, listen, man, do you want to quit this Uber bullshit and just be Drake and I's full-time driver? And I'll pay you $250K a year, and you could live with us if you want, and we'll have movie nights. It'll be great. And he's like, sure. He doesn't say much. That's what I like about him. And so, and you know, my decision to hire him doesn't come from a sexual place. But as I'm saying, as I'm talking, I'm realizing that there are probably some homoerotic undertones that I need to address on my own time. I'm not going to do it over the podcast, or maybe I will in a different episode. Anyways, so then we're all in the car. And he's like, do you have any music requests? And upon hearing this, Drake turns around and she looks at me and she's like, and then I look at Drake and I'm like, because there's clearly only one choice. And then he, you know, Drake and I are so locked in. We've only known each other for 11 minutes, but we are just locked in to each other's vibes. And then the driver notices us looking at each other, and he goes, you know, he realizes the mistake because there really is only one choice. So he cues up his iPod, and we drive off into the sunset, blasting. Started from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the bottom, now the whole team fucking here. Started from the bottom, now we're here. The end. And we live happily ever after. The end. So that's my 7-year plan. That's where I want to be after 7 years of podcasting. I want that whole scene to manifest. Although I was talking to a friend recently, I told her that I wanted a sphynx, and she said, did you know that they leave like oil spots on furniture because they don't have any hair? And I was like, what? That's repulsive. That's so much worse than getting cat hair in your mouth to me. So I'm probably going to buy something else. But anyways, thanks again for being here. See, hear that? That's a helicopter. This is what I decided. I can't afford one of those fancy soundproof studio rooms yet. And my apartment is, you know, right in the heart of Hollywood. So, and it's noisy. So there are going to be sounds permeating this podcast all the time, throughout. First I thought this was maybe a problem, but now that's just going to be part of the brand of this podcast. It's going to be part of the charm of this podcast, that Hollywood is kind of the backing track. Okay, so you're going to hear helicopters, you're going to hear ambulances, you're going to hear feral dogs, you're going to hear the occasional shotgun. But it's all good. It has a charm to it, and I'm leaving it. I hope you're hanging in there. I really do. It is bleak times for a lot of people, whether you've lost your job, or you've lost your home, or you've lost your libido, or you've lost your sanity, or maybe even you've lost the love you once had for your children. I think we all fit into one of those categories. So I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're not letting the anxiety get into your blood too deeply. I'm certainly anxious, and I'm trying to fight that. I'm anxious. A lot of people need help right now. The world is hurting. And I guess in a way it's always been hurting, but I feel it a lot right now, as I'm sure many of you do. And I'm the kind of person who has a hard time breaking things down into smaller pieces. I want to do everything now, and I want to save the entire world all at once. But you can't do that. And if you try to do that, you become paralyzed. And you end up just sitting around in your apartment daydreaming about spending $1 million on a cat that's going to leave disgusting oil spots all over your furniture with its gross, oily, naked body. That's what happens. So you got to break it down. And I figured out something for myself that I'm going to try, and I'm going to share it with you because maybe it's something you might want to try. And it's the idea of being a good neighbor. Because I think if you aren't good at being a good neighbor, then you have no hope in trying to save the world. It's hopeless. And what I mean by being a good neighbor, I'm not talking about, you don't have to be Mr. Rogers. You don't have to be gregarious in a way that's against your nature. But, thinking about myself, I've lived in over 10 apartment buildings throughout the last 10 years of my life, like large buildings where there's quite a few people. And I've never once made it my prerogative to get to know the people I'm surrounded by. I'll wave in the hall, throw out a rhetorical "how you doing?" And keep quiet so that I don't disturb anybody with my noise. That was basically the extent of my neighborliness. And that's not enough. We need to reestablish the small community, which is, I feel like it's dying. And I'm in a big city. I feel like, there's plenty of places that this doesn't apply. But if you're a city slicker, or even if you're not, and you feel like you isolate your neighbors, I would implore you to step up your neighborliness, because that's where you got to start. Remember people's names. That's a big one. I used to tell myself that I was terrible at remembering people's names. Turns out I just didn't really give a shit. But then I decided to give a shit. If I heard somebody's name, I would run it through my head for like 30 seconds, or create a mnemonic device, or write it down. It's really not that hard. And then when you see that person again in the hall, and you address them by their name, something powerful happens. And that thing that happens, I think, is the key ingredient to saving the world. That's a small scale version of the feeling that it's going to take to save the world. And if you practice that kind of thing on a small scale, like in your apartment building or in your cul-de-sac or at your office, and you get good at it there, then you can start applying it to the bigger picture. And I think this is really, really important. If you want to save the world, then figure out how to be a really good neighbor first. Let people know in your neighborhood that you are available if you are needed in some capacity, however that looks for you. I don't want to get too preachy, but I think that is a problem. I think people are too used to keeping to themselves. And then those same people go out and protest, and they send impassioned tweets about wanting change, and yet they can't be a good neighbor. And that, to me, that's kind of backwards. So start there. I digress. And also, last point of preachiness, I also implore you to vote. And this is coming from an historic non-voter. Full disclosure, I've never voted, and this is going to be the first year. I've always distrusted the system. I really don't like the two-party system. I don't like the soul selling it seems to take to be one of those two candidates. I've never believed that my individual vote is actually reaching the end of the line. However, I had a little bit of a shift in thinking, and I started to view voting as more of a symbolic gesture, kind of like my relationship with praying. I'll pray on occasion, and I'm trying to do it more. But it's not because I think that there's somebody on the other end of that prayer, taking notes and actually hearing me. But there is this phenomenon that happens where when you speak things into the world, as opposed to just keep them inside of you, it has an effect. When you can verbalize to the world that you desire certain things, or that you fear certain things, or that you want this for yourself, or your family, or your friends, it creates a powerful feeling. And the same thing kind of happened to me when I made the decision to vote. After making that decision, I suddenly found myself more engaged with community issues and national issues, and I found myself having more conversations with a wider variety of people, and discovering how important it is to have those conversations with everybody, especially people who disagree with you. Because if we're only talking to people who agree with us, that does nothing. That does nothing. You can't excommunicate people from your life or from your feed who disagree with you. You have to try to change their mind. Because if they're silly people with silly thoughts, or bigoted thoughts, or racist thoughts, you have a chance to impact that and make them less silly. And that's great. So, the point being, conversations. Very important. Got to have more of them. And for me, making the decision to vote impacted that. So try it on. Just make the decision to do it and see how you feel. Try it on like a suit. If it doesn't fit, then maybe you can figure out your own way to impact things. But try it on. Great. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the maiden voyage of Grandma's favorite podcast with video. So, great. I'll catch you next time. Thank you so much. Be well, be kind. Later.